Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 11th of April. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is Scotland at 7. This evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 47 of the illegal Russian invasion. Then I'll introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer has met Vladimir Putin today, the first European leader to meet the Russian president since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. In a tweet, Nehammer said Austria was militarily neutral, but that it had a clear stance on Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry claims it has destroyed an S-300 anti-aircraft missile system near Dnipro that had been supplied to Ukraine by an unspecified European country. This claim has been described as disinformation by Slovakia's Prime Minister, Eduard Heger, whose country donated an S-300 system to Ukraine last week. In his regular nightly address to the nation on Sunday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of having lost connection with reality to a degree that they accuse us of committing what Russian troops have obviously done. Tens of thousands of people are likely to have been killed in Russia's assault on the southeastern city of Mariupol, and more than 300 Ukrainian hospitals have been destroyed, Zelensky told the South Korean parliament today. Russia is likely to continue strikes on transport infrastructure in order to disrupt the supply of goods to the places of hostilities, the General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces has said in its latest operational report. In its latest intelligence update on Ukraine, the UK's Ministry of Defence warns that Russia's past use of phosphorus munitions in Donetsk raised the possibility of their future employment in Mariupol as fighting for the city intensifies. Pro-Russian forces in the self-proclaimed Republic of Donetsk have said they will intensify their fight in eastern Ukraine. And Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of Russia's Republic of Chechnya, has said that there will be an offensive by Russian forces not only on Mariupol, but also in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. The German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock says that Germany has seen massive indications of war crimes in Ukraine. Norway is to extend its deployment of 200 troops in Lithuania until August. Ireland's Foreign Minister Simon Coveney has said the European Commission is working on details of an oil embargo on Russia as part of a possible new sanctions package. France's ambassador to Ukraine, Etienne de Poncin, has posted a picture from Lviv showing teams of forensic officers that have arrived from France to assist local authorities in investigating reported war crimes. And New Zealand will send a C-130H Hercules cargo aircraft and a 50-person team to Europe to help to distribute military aid to Ukraine. Now, we are lucky enough this evening to be joined by a regular contributor, Chris McCusker. Chris is an activist, a campaigner, a carer, and a humanitarian aid worker. Chris, how are you doing this evening?
And also a Liverpool Football Club supporter as well. I'm grand, Andrew, I'm grand.
Well, it's great to see you, Chris. Thank you. That looks and sounds like your Twitter bio. So we'll add Liverpool fan to that as well. But our first story this evening is that the newly appointed general in command of Russia's military campaign in Ukraine is likely to usher in a fresh round of crimes and brutality against civilians, the US has said. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor in Washington, said the appointment of Alexander Dvornikov as theater commander of Russian forces in Ukraine could not disguise the strategic failure of Vladimir Putin's war so far. Ukraine will never be subjugated to Russia. It doesn't matter what general President Putin tries to appoint, he told CNN. Dvornikov's appointment follows the withdrawal of Russian forces from around the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Dvornikov, who is 60, came to prominence at the head of Russian troops in Syria in 2015-2016, when there were particularly brutal bombardments of rebel-held areas, including the civilian populations in Aleppo. Sullivan said that Dvornikov's promotion would lead to more atrocities. This particular has a resume that includes brutality against civilians in other theatres in Syria, and we can expect more of the same in Ukraine, he said. Vonikov's ascent, disclosed by US officials on Sunday, signals an effort by Moscow to impose military order on a campaign that has had serious setbacks. In the face of fierce Ukrainian resistance, supported by US, UK, and European armaments, Russia appears to be regrouping for a potentially long battle for Donbass in the east of the country. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba told NBC News Ukraine won the battle for Kyiv. Now another battle is coming, the battle for Donbass. After failing to capture Kyiv, the Kremlin has rebranded its invasion. It now says its objective is to restore the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, which are partly controlled by pro-Russian separatists. Moscow also wants to seize additional Ukrainian-controlled territory and cut off Kyiv's defending army. So, Chris, as we were saying, the newly appointed General Alexander Dvonikov commanded Russian forces in Syria from 2015 up until 2020, during which something like 350,000 people are said to have died. Do you think that there is a risk that now he's in charge of Russian operations in Ukraine? Do you think there's a risk that we're going to start to see that sort of death toll now?
Well, yeah, I honestly I fear for the worst, and doing some investigative journalism on this story, I unearthed a nice wee piece on ABC News, which actually cites a Syrian army lieutenant colonel who is now defected. And he raises all the normal alarm signs, that should be flagged, and people should be cognizant of, because this newly appointed general has got a past history, and he has actually cited them to be a very thuggish and a very brutal, single-minded individual, and he has actually branded him a war criminal, for his past involvement in Syria, and that should set alarm bells off on everybody's head at the moment.
Of course, Chris. Now, I'm thinking about this a little bit further. If we begin to see the sort of what are sometimes described as cauldron tactics by the Russian army, cauldron tactics that were used in Aleppo in Syria and in Grozny in Chechnya, and by cauldron I mean the Russian army lays siege to a settlement and flattens it, utterly flattens it with artillery and air attacks. Now, with the sort of loss of civilian life that is attendant to the cauldron tactics and the flattening of settlements, what do you think the response from the West and from other allies will be if we begin to see these tactics being used against Mariupol or other Russian cities, other Ukrainian cities? I'm sorry.
Well, again, I think it would be foolish to try and second guess what the response is from the West, from the EU and from the UN in general. As I've said before to you, Andrew, I think there's a certain amount of cack-canniness going on, where the neutral forces don't want to overstep the mark, by adopting, not bully boy tactics, but basically retaliation, in any such shape, manner, or form, and while it's not, for me to say that it's wholly right that the Ukrainians match fire with fire, but I think if the Western allies start sort of like deploying those kind of tactics, then I think it will only escalate more rapidly. So I think that for the time being, that is a certain case of slowly catch a monkey.
Okay, Chris, thanks. Let's move on to our next story for this evening now, because Sweden's ruling party has begun debating whether the country should join NATO, and neighbouring Finland expects to reach a similar decision within weeks, as Moscow warned that the Nordic nation's accession would not bring stability to Europe. Both countries are officially non-aligned militarily, but public support for NATO membership has almost doubled since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to about 50% in Sweden and 60% in Finland, multiple opinion polls have suggested. Sweden's centre-left Social Democrats, led by the Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson, said their security review was about more than just joining the 30-nation alliance, adding that the party could decide to apply even without the backing of other members. Having stressed at the outbreak of the war that non-alignment had served Sweden's interests well, Andersson said she was ready to discuss the policy in light of Moscow's aggression, and in late March she said that she did not rule out joining NATO. This question is expected to be a key issue in parliamentary elections due on 11th of September, with centre-right opposition parties already saying they would back a NATO application, and the far-right Sweden Democrats also open to the idea. Finland, which shares an 830-mile-long border with Russia, and like Sweden is a NATO partner after abandoning its position of strict neutrality at the end of the Cold War, is expected to outline its decision regarding the alliance before midsummer. Alexander Stubb, a former Prime Minister of Finland, told AFP it was a foregone conclusion that Helsinki would apply to join NATO, probably in time for a June NATO summit in Madrid. A government-commissioned national security review is due to be delivered to the Finnish Parliament next week to help MPs there decide on the question before they vote, with one recent poll suggesting only 6 of the country's 200 MPs were opposed. So, Chris, it's felt, I think, in both Sweden and Finland that non-alignment or neutrality has served them both well since the Second World War. Although there have always been challenges, as you would expect, with a neighbour like Russia. But are these moves now in both parliaments? Are they an indication of the significance and the seriousness of what Putin has ignited? That both these countries, previously neutral and militarily non-aligned, are now seemingly supportive of joining the NATO organisation.
Well, yeah, on the face of it, you would think that that would be the case, but I'm questioning as to why now, that they're considering this. I mean, are they looking at the long term? For a time when this conflict is over, or are they looking at a short term? Because they are scared of any singular retribution that Putin might, possibly impose on them. I mean, the whole ethos of NATO, was obviously formed after the war, and it was basically to reject fascism. It was to reject, anybody who set themselves up as a despot. And to try and I say this quite deliberately. It was also set up to try and instill peace across the obviously the two member states in America and Canada, but also again around Europe, where obviously so much carnage and mayhem was created just by one despot, so I mean, this was seen to sort of like put down or quell anyone from thinking that they could get away with doing the same. So maybe they're wanting to come under that umbrella for a bit of safety, a bit of security. I don't know, but it could therefore open the doors for other countries to seek membership as well. And I'm drawing on the ethos of my union training as the fact that there is solidarity in numbers and unity is strength. And you would like to think that, with the amount of member states in NATO, then, obviously, just for argument's sake, 30 against 1 is always going to win, you would like to think.
Of course, Chris. Now, one other aspect of this story, we know that some on the left of politics in the West have been critical of what they describe as NATO expansion. Countries, for example, in the Baltics, who'd all lined up and joined NATO after the fall of the former Soviet Union. So the countries joining NATO has been described as NATO expansion. And of course, the Kremlin administration today described the moves by Sweden and Finland as a tool geared towards confrontation. Now, as you've been just describing, also from a left wing or from a union perspective, solidarity and safety in numbers can be a strong motivating factor. And it would appear to me that the discussions in Sweden and Finland are nothing more than a symptom of countries wishing to be in a position to defend themselves against a neighbouring country which is now clearly belligerent and is indulging in wars of aggression in Europe. So is it reasonable to criticise this as NATO expansion, or is it simply countries looking to provide themselves in a time of danger?
Well, I think I mean, I think it's unhealthy to call it NATO expansion. I mean, the whole ethos of again NATO is the fact that if anyone aligns itself with the founding basis of NATO, then you could apply to join. It's not an elite club or anything like that. It's I think that you just have to sign up to the founding morality of NATO, and that shared sort of like umbrella of, again, solidarity and neutrality, as well as support when needed and if required. So I think it's typical of Russia to sort of like say, this is what we warned against, the ever increasing group membership and stuff like that, where NATO are going to, I don't know, take over the world routine and all the rest of it. I think that's sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of like wee man speak, is it not? In Glaswegian, it really sounds as if Putin's got a chip in his shoulder on this one. People should be free in any democracy around the world to choose what they want and what they don't want. I mean, apparently we live in a democracy in UK, and people chose to leave the European Union. But I mean, that's you have to accept that sometimes results in a democracy don't always go your way.
No, absolutely, Chris. And actually, it's a nice description there, perhaps maybe not fair, but describing Vladimir Putin as a wee man in the East End of Glasgow on a Friday night, perhaps, who's been drinking from that notorious ceramic sherry cask that sat on the bar of the Surrey Heat, into which all the spills were poured, and then you could buy a pint of it. But we'll put that aspect of East End life to one side for a moment, because our next story is that the University of Edinburgh and the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv in Ukraine are to join forces on a new strategic partnership as part of a twinning initiative. Recognising their complementary strengths and shared values, the two universities have signalled their intention to work more closely together on opportunities ranging across teaching, learning and research. The new partnership will strengthen existing ties between the two institutions and will boost the exchange of people and ideas, the creation of joint research initiatives, and foster greater virtual connections and digital learning. Despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev remains open, with many students and staff studying and working remotely. The Alliance will support the National University to sustain its operations during this turbulent period and to deepen collaborations and opportunities for mutual gain in the future. And of course, the partnership builds on the City of Edinburgh's existing twinning arrangement with Kiev. So Chris, the principal of Edinburgh University, Professor Peter Matheson, said, as two of Europe's leading universities, we share many common interests and values, and I'm pleased we are able to accelerate our forward-looking collaboration. Do you think this collaboration will help to demonstrate the common interests and common values, not just between these universities, not just between academics, but perhaps between our wider communities, the community in Scotland and the community in Ukraine?
I think it will, and it definitely should, and I would encourage any initiative to again show that gesture of solidarity to enhance and continue the twinning of the two cities, and showing more collaboration and more cooperation, and possibly not sort of like favoritism or anything like that, but to try and sort of like foster links that will enable Ukrainian academics and to come over to Edinburgh, and maybe for a year or 2 years, or whatever the coursework involves, and trying to sort of like support them as well. And I mean, it might not be the best time for Scottish people go over to Ukraine and study, but I think it's possibly something that could be reciprocated in another 5 years or so, and again, we should be looking for a nuanced way, in order to try and help and support the people of Ukraine without overstepping the mark, obviously, of the bounds of the UK government. Where again, Scotland is ham-fisted in a lot of ways, to be able to do things sort of like not off the cuff, but things that would appear natural for the likes of you and I and stuff like that. But then when it comes to get rubber stamping by the shall we say the ruling government of the land, shall we put it like that, more often than not, good ideas go into that building down in the southeast, and it's like a massive big shock absorber. When good ideas go in and they get kicked around and boxed around, and they come out a shadow of their former self, and fit to or should I say, not fit to man their beast, of its original intention.
Yeah, I get that, Chris. That's a great description. Let's move to a story closer to home now, because responding to new analysis from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which highlights that this month will mark the greatest fall in the value of the basic rate of out-of-work benefit in 50 years, and its strong criticism of the UK government that it has chosen to weaken the incomes of the poorest at the worst possible moment, the SNP's shadow DWP spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman MP, has said households across Scotland and the UK are being hammered by a Tory cost of living crisis, which the Prime Minister and Chancellor have failed to properly lift a finger to tackle. Instead, the Chancellor has been more focused on his billionaire family, potentially saving millions through a tax loophole. The latest research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation this month will mark the greatest fall in the value of the basic rate of out-of-work benefits in 50 years, and a decade of Tory cuts and freezes has led to this benefit losing value in 8 of the last 10 years, and must serve as a wake-up call to government. She continued, in a damning indictment of the Tories' record in office, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has also condemned it for choosing to weaken the incomes of the poorest at the worst possible moment. So, Chris, you can maybe help me here. What do you think is the Conservative government in Westminster's policy aim of behind the Chancellor's decision to, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, push an extra 1.3 million people, including 500,000 children, into absolute poverty?
It's a question I can't answer because I have not got the understanding of the Chancellor's mind. I don't even think that the Chancellor knows his own mind, bearing in mind the fact that he can't even operate a contactless payment. So I mean, I think last week I was talking about policy choices, direct policy choices, and this is a direct policy choice by the Tory party to continue in their single-minded agenda of austerity, because it doesn't affect them and it doesn't affect many of the people who are members of their party. Again, I cited what they are now touting around London at the moment as the metropolitan liberal elite. Those with a disposable income that actually allows them to live comfortably in the southeast of England. If I can cast my mind back 30 years, 35 years, when I used to live in the leafy suburbs of Surrey, and it was tough. It was really tough, to live alongside. I used to live in a place called Esher, which is just up from Sandown Racecourse, and some of the people that lived in Esher were, Cliff Richard, Chris Tarrant, Mick Hucknall. And it's like it's tough living alongside those people, because whilst you're living alongside them, you're still checking your pocket to see if you can afford something, whereas they just blindly go into the pocket, buy it, and that's it, end of story, and don't think twice about it. That's the same constituency that Dominic Raab is the MP for. And it is quite top heavy. I'm actually surprised that it's run by Tories, because it's actually top heavy with, a heavy liberal support. I used to have to jump on a train in order to go to a Labour meeting in Putney. Do you know what I mean? Because there was no Labour meetings in, the sleepy suburbs of Esher and Walton on Thames. So, but honestly, I think it's a direct policy choice, and quite clearly, I think they know what they're doing, and they are willing to carry on doing it regardless of people's individual thing. And it's only when people, actually get in touch with them and say, look, this is really, really, tough for me. But even at that, they won't change the policy, just because of a groundswell of opinion. Again, they will just carry on regardless.
Yes, Chris. If I'm correct, I think Dominic Raab has the narrowest majority of any cabinet minister as a result of standing for Esher. So we'll see what happens there. I was going to ask you another question, and you alluded to it in the context of the 1980s. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation is saying that the basic rate of unemployment benefit has lost value in 8 out of the last 10 years, and that it's at a 35-year low in real terms. And even by my mathematics, that's the late 1980s. Now, you were talking about your experience in Esher in the late 1980s. I'd argue that Scotland is still seeing some of the long-term effects of those years of Thatcherite poverty and brutal deindustrialisation that was the hallmark of Thatcherism. We still see a number of people suggest that one of the drivers behind the rate of drugs deaths that we see in Scotland is that a part of our population have been continuing to take drugs since the late 1980s, and that was a response to the poverty and the circumstances in which they found themselves at that time. So if Scotland's still having to deal with problems from the 1980s when out-of-work benefits were at their lowest, is this latest real terms cut for unemployment benefit and out-of-work benefits, is this latest real-time cut going to pile more problems on top of the problems that Scotland is still dealing with from 35 years ago?
Well, again, undoubtedly it will, and again, I think last week I alluded to the fact that Scotland has to, or should I say the Scottish Government, mitigate, and that's a very important word, mitigate. They managed to give quite a lot of the Tory policy a body swerve financially, because of the fact that it's policy choices that the majority of Scottish constituents just will not swallow. So I mean, we already mitigate the two-child rape clause. We already mitigate against the bedroom tax, and just so many areas that the Scottish Government have chosen an alternative policy because they cannot, in all consciousness, inflict it upon the Scottish people. Again, Tigme, you've mentioned Thatcher. Many of the policies that was created and enacted by the Thatcher government back in the 80s had a direct consequence on Scotland, like maybe pit closures were obviously inevitable as we think about the climate emergency and stuff like that. But the steelworks and the factory closures, the fact that, I mean, Scotland doesn't produce cars anymore. We had one of the biggest car manufacturing factories in Linwood and Paisley, with Chrysler Sunbeam. We had the smelter works, methyl, and all the rest of it. And through the demonising of trade unions, the erosion of workers' rights, and all the rest of it, Thatcher managed to, and obviously I haven't mentioned the poll tax. So I mean, now this bout of austerity, which is a continuance of her legacy, basically, compare what we're going through now as an insight to what is going to happen in August, because in August it is going to be austerity on steroid stilts. I kid you not. This is just a small taste of what's going to happen. Earlier on I alluded to my socialist values, that I was, I indulged myself to put the heating on for an hour the other night there. And, honestly, I kid you not, people are not going to be able to have that choice.
Thanks, Chris. And I didn't mean to provoke a Proclaimers song out of you there with references to Linwood and Lochaber, but let's look at another aspect of the Tory cost of living crisis, because the SNP has demanded the UK government finally scrap the cruel two-child cap introduced by the Tories in April 2017, as families continue to struggle to make ends meet amidst the Tory-made cost of living crisis. The SNP's Work and Pension spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman MP, said the Tory policy, the only one of its kind in the world, is exacerbating child poverty and undermining the Scottish Government's efforts to end it in Scotland for good. Research published on the 5-year anniversary of the policy revealed that it has not achieved its aim of discouraging poorer families from having children. It has only made families poorer. The research follows a disgraceful spring statement from the Chancellor, which failed to deliver any policies that will financially support those who are being hit hardest by the Tory cost of living crisis. a fact that many anti-poverty charities have condemned. To tackle child poverty, the Scottish Government introduced the Scottish Child Payment, the first of its kind in the UK, which is now being doubled. The SNP government has also brought in another 6 brand new benefits and has uprated 8 other benefits by 6% this year. So, Chris, thinking again, putting yourself in the mind of the Chancellor, and I know that maybe not a great place to be, but putting yourself in his position, we've spoken about this story twice now in 2 weeks because we came past the 5th anniversary of this Tory policy last week, and it got me to thinking: do you think that there is a risk that as the economic crisis escalates, the Tories might double down on this policy, insisting that poor families have either only one or, for that matter, no children for which there would be any state support?
I very much doubt that the Tories will double down. They are not a party, that are susceptible to doing that. I mean, 5 years that this policy has been mitigated by the Scottish Government. Think of the money that the Scottish Government could have used that on. Think of the infrastructure projects that excess money could be used on. Think again, about the fact that if they just concentrated the money that they have spent in 5 years on, supporting food banks, or insulating homes, or trying to keep the cost of living down and stuff like that, and instead we've been forced. And this is something, again, that unionist voters just don't seem to understand. They just accept the fact that the Scottish Government do this, and and just don't blink an eye, because it doesn't concern them. Because again, we talked about the middle-aged median earners and stuff like that in the southeast of England. The median middle earners in Scotland, possibly don't think twice about having a child and stuff like that, because they're living, some of them, in £355,000 houses upwards. Some places, well, just round the corner from me, it's 650,000. They've got 2 cars in the drive. They can afford to go, a couple of holidays a year, the meagre offering from the UK government with regards to child benefit really doesn't figure a hell of a lot in in balancing the books, and that average sort of like 2.4 family. Where it really cuts down to the bone is high level areas of deprivation, such as you had mentioned one of my favourite drinking holes, the Sariehead in the East End. Where, I mean, people are making severe choices as to whether they can afford potatoes for their main meal, or whether it's a case of boiling the bag noodles and stuff like that. Anything that's cost effective and quick in order to eat.
Yep. Now that you mentioned, Chris, there, you mentioned the insulating homes and addressing the energy crisis in terms of the cost of energy, and that's a good segue into our next item this evening, because Britain's self-titled money-saving expert Martin Lewis has warned that civil unrest over rising energy bills isn't far away, as he repeated his call for more government intervention to protect people. And that's a sentence I never thought I'd be reading out. Lewis said he was the most scared he has been for people's finances since he founded his popular website in 2003. It has traditionally offered advice on which bank accounts or phone providers may be most cost effective, and has been a regular port of call for people looking to switch energy provider and save money. However, after the recent increase in the price cap for household energy bills to £1,971, it took the step of publishing a Heat the Human guide for people on how to keep themselves and their homes warm as they face a choice between heating and putting food on the table. It includes steps like putting hot water bottles in sleeping bags. This is one of the richest countries in the world. It's pretty desperate, isn't it? Lewis said. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph, he said, "We need to keep people fed. We need to keep people warm. If we get this wrong right now, then we get to the point where we start to risk civil unrest. When breadwinners cannot provide, anger brews and civil unrest brews. And I do not think that we're very far off." It echoes his comments to The Guardian in an interview in March, when he said that the inflation and rising household costs could plunge more people into absolute poverty. A further rise for the energy cap is expected in the autumn. It is thought that inflation could reach 8.4% this year, according to an economic outlook report by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Lewis said that he thinks real inflation could go as high as 12%. If the PwC prediction is borne out, it would mean an overall drop of 2% in household incomes. This would be the biggest decline in wages since the 1970s and the largest fall in living standards since records began. Lewis added, "For people towards the bottom end, there's nothing to cut back on. It is not an exaggeration to say that there are people we have to prevent freezing and starving." So, Chris, if the PwC prediction is borne out, it would mean an overall drop of 2% in household incomes, the biggest decline in wages since the 1970s, and the largest fall in living standards since records began. How do you think people are going to react to
that? Again, the people, and I want to avoid using the word the working class, but you know, I mean, people who are struggling at this moment in time are really starting to get worried. There was a social media event the other night there for 20 minutes to turn off your electricity supply. If enough people do it, then it'll register, and you know, and they will see a dropout and stuff like that of the service. You know, to send some sort of virtual signal to the companies. You know, and it's interesting that you mentioned the 1970s. Obviously, you and I are of an age where we can remember when there was, you know, like real power cuts, and you know, people relied on candles, you know, in order to illuminate their houses and stuff like that. And you know, pretty soon people are going to start reverting to those kind of tactics in order to try and save money, because people are now so reliant on their computer screens, you know, which obviously need powered. You know, I mean, you need power obviously for your broadband router and whatnot, what have you. But you know, if you're lucky enough to have a car, you could possibly go and charge your laptop out in the car, and then you know go and get it after a couple of hours. You know, when it's got a full charge, so that you're not using the electricity in the house. You know, I mean, where do we stop? You know, are we going to be starting to use the voltage input in the cars, you know, in order to boil a kettle and make a cup of tea? You know, because you see these smart meters. You know, when you put the kettle on, they jump up the scale to about 7 or 8. You know, for about 3 minutes because of the surge of electricity. So people are going to make choices. But again, it's only until the middle earners, the median middle rate earner, you know, when they start tightening their belts, that's the time that the government will possibly think twice about you know their strategy towards these policies.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you. And let's look not necessarily at the middle, at the median. Let's look at one end of the income scale, because Rishi Sunak has written to the Prime Minister to ask for an investigation into his own affairs after days of criticism over his wife's non-dom tax status and a lack of transparency over their financial affairs. The Chancellor wrote to Boris Johnson asking him for a referral to Lord Geidt, the independent advisor, requesting a review of all of his declarations since becoming a minister in 2018. Sunak said he was confident it would find all relevant information was properly declared on the advice of officials. It follows criticism that his entry on the list of ministers' interests contains no mention of Akshata Murthy's £690 million stake in the Indian IT company Infosys, which has UK government contracts. He's also facing scrutiny over his investments held in a blind management arrangement, with his spokesperson declining to say which jurisdiction they are held in or when the arrangement was formed. Sunak has come under pressure over whether his decision to keep a US green card, conferring permanent residency for 19 months while he was Chancellor, also represents a conflict of interest with his UK government role. However, the inquiry requested by Sunak will only cover his ministerial career, and there is still a mystery over his lack of any declaration of financial interests from the time he became an MP in 2015 until 2018, when he became a minister and formed the blind management arrangement. So, Chris, this all feels a bit Groundhog Day to me. Boris Johnson has to get Sue Gray to tell him he's at a Christmas party, and now Sunak is asking Lord Geidt to tell him that his family's been avoiding paying taxes. And most importantly, in both cases, it feels rather like there are going to be no meaningful ramifications. Is that fair?
No, it's absolutely not fair. And, we know the past history about the Tories and, internal and external investigations, can be subjugated by, I mean, again, you mentioned the Sue Gray report. Where is that? When will we see the conclusion of that? Possibly after Boris has been ousted out of Parliament, and I don't know. Be careful what you wish for. Then we've got a Labour government again, run by a Knight of the Realm, which just cuts against the grain of the whole ethos of the Labour Party. But that's a different discussion. Any internal investigation, Boris will try and curry the flavour to make sure that nothing comes out of it. And again, it's been well documented about. An awful lot of people say, well, look, his ex-wife or his wife is free to do as she does. She's not in the public eye. She's not a member of Parliament and stuff like that. But I mean, I think anybody in the member of Parliament, if you want to hold the moral high ground over someone else, you have to make sure that you yourself are completely squeaky clean, legit, and above board. And if you've got skeletons in the cupboard, there's one thing we all bemoan about, the British tabloid press, and obviously we don't bemoan the reporting press of this channel, but the investigative journalism of certain news outlets in Britain, some of them really don't ask the most searching of questions. But when this is plastered all over the Daily Mail, that there's a story to be read and to be highlighted, because it's not very often that they turn on their own, that's for sure.
That's spot on, Chris, and we'll be listening out for the unmistakable sound of those skeletons, I'm sure, in the days and weeks to come. But we'll move back to Europe now, because Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen went in opposite directions today in an attempt to drum up support from new voters they need to win the final round of France's presidential election in less than a fortnight. Macron headed north, where he spent several hours talking to crowds at Denain, which is a former mining town once controlled by socialists but now a far-right stronghold. He promised that he would listen to candidates who failed to qualify in Sunday's first round of the election. Le Pen headed south into northern Burgundy, where the Paris commuter belt meets the countryside and where she already enjoys support. Both candidates need to convince the 49% of voters who did not support either of them on last Sunday and the 25.1% who did not vote at all if they want to win the second round on the 24th of April. Both will be looking to poach some of the 7.7 million plus voters who supported the radical left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the only left-wing candidate to get anywhere near the second round, with 21.95% of the vote yesterday. It was announced today that Macron and Le Pen will go head-to-head in a televised debate 4 days before the vote, during which they will be questioned about their programmes. In 2017, almost 16.5 million viewers watched the pair trade insults in a match that seriously damaged Le Pen after she lost her cool and became aggressive. Macron needs to unite a hostile electorate from the political extremes to vote for him on the 24th, with many, particularly on the left, feeling politically orphaned by Sunday's result. Getting them to vote at all will be the first hurdle. Macron said he was prepared to extend a hand to political rivals who lost in the first round and consider a new method, but refused to be more specific, saying only that he would be speaking to them. He also said he would develop his programme after listening to the anger and despair of those who had not voted for him, and particularly young people's concerns over the environment. Mélenchon has emerged as kingmaker in third place after he rose to within a few points of Le Pen at just under 22% in a surprising 11th hour surge. He has advised his supporters not to vote for Le Pen in the second round, but stopped short of advising them to vote for Macron. High abstention in the second round is likely to play in Le Pen's favour. So, Chris, Macron's view doesn't seem to have changed very much. He said, Macron's view doesn't seem to have changed very much. He said, I salute the voters' clarity regarding the far and the fact that we have to stop them. But then again, it struck me that I don't think you would necessarily call Macron particularly left-wing. So looking at politics more generally, both in France and elsewhere, in the West in particular, how long do you think that this swing to the right wing is going to persist?
Well, my brother-in-law lives just outside Paris in a sleepy wee village called Corbeil-Essonnes, and he was telling me a while ago that that they are so similar, Macron and Le Pen. I mean, obviously Le Pen is more alt-right, but Macron is actually, centre-leaning right, and an awful lot of people are just fed up with that, because it doesn't resonate with the groundswell feeling of the French people who, in years gone by, prided themselves to actually live in the Republic, shall we say, and that word Republic, it evokes a lot of memories of back in the days of when the common man would shout guillotine, if somebody stood out of line. And they take an awful lot of pride, and that 45% that didn't actually get engaged in the first round, that's a hell of a hill, in order to climb. And Macron really needs to up his game, because the sobering thought that Marine Le Pen could actually be the French president is something that everybody needs to wake up and smell the coffee about, because she has been cited in several newspapers. She has got close links to Vladimir Putin. She has her sympathies. So I mean, this is a really, really delicate situation. And as I say, Macron needs to up his game and appeal to, the level-headed French Republicans, who wish to keep control of their own country. Because if Le Pen gets control of the country, it's not going to be the France that we know.
Yep, that, as you say, it's perhaps time to wake up. Now, Chris, there's one final story that I'd like to squeeze in. We'll probably not have time to talk about it, but I think it's a story that's worth broadcasting this evening, because a new fund to help develop the emerging CO2 utilization technology has been launched. The CO2 Utilization Challenge Fund will help businesses and organizations develop and commercialize the technology, which involves harnessing and converting CO2, the biggest contributor to climate change emissions, and using it to produce valuable products such as synthetic fuels and proteins for use in aquaculture. The fund will be administered by the Scottish Enterprise and match funded by industry, meaning over £10 million could be invested in the initiative over its 2-year lifetime. The Net Zero and Energy Secretary Michael Matheson said the Scottish Government is fully committed to helping Scotland become a net zero economy. The IPCC's latest reports show that the impacts of climate change are even worse than previously thought, and that business as usual is not an option. We know that in order to deliver on our targets, we must develop and grow innovative technologies like carbon capture and utilization alongside carbon capture and storage. Promising early work around potential uses for captured CO2, that CO2 utilization has real potential to help develop a circular economy while providing opportunities for our workforces and economic benefits for a range of different sectors. And that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, and we really need your support, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can also contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. I'd also like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and in particular, I'd like to say a special thanks to our very special guest, Glasgow's biggest fan of Bruce Grobbelaar, Mr. Chris McCusker. Thanks, Chris.
It's actually Jurgen Klopp these days, but he's the man. But thanks very much again, Andrew. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Chris. I was thinking of your 80s heritage there. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you can join us again soon on Broadcasting Scotland, but in the meantime, please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.